Hello all, very good morning. Thanks for joining this session. Let me share my screen. Okay, so today onwards, let's start the Spring Boot 2.x. But before starting the Spring Boot 2.x content, let us discuss the global picture of this course. What we're gonna do in this course and how does it help us in cracking the interviews and also while doing your day-to-day work. Okay, so you all came here to learn the Spring Boot, microservices, and of course, Spring Cloud concepts, and then implementation of the project, right? And then deploying this project over a cloud. So this might be a expectation where from where you came to here, right? So before seeing that expectation, you might have heard about the Spring Boot is like a mostly used buzzword in the market nowadays, right? So why the Spring Boot becomes so popular? There were so many reasons why the Spring Boot becomes so popular. But before going to that details, I would like to let you know the concepts that the market is looking for from a candidate in the Spring Boot microservices, and then this stack, Spring Boot microservices, Spring Cloud, Docker, Kubernetes, whatever the technical stack is now the market is using. So in that technical stack, what is the high expectation from the market is. So that we will see with the survey, so that you will easily understand what exactly you have to focus while learning, right? And then at what depth of the concept you have to learn, that we can focus. So let me jump to the survey. Of course, you might have already know this. The survey conducted by the VMware. VMware is maintaining the Spring projects actually. Spring projects is maintaining by this VMware. So the state of the Spring 2021 is the report delivered by this VMware. By the 2021, what is the state of the Spring? The 2022 report is not yet delivered. So this report mainly divided into the 4 sections: community, and then Spring projects, and then APIs, and then modern applications, and Spring native. These are the 4 sections they were divided to conduct a survey. And among these 4 sessions, if we can go here, thriving community, the first section. So 2020 to 2021, 61% of the developers surveyed use Spring Boot as their only or primary development platform. 61% of the developers who participated in this survey, what the survey they have conducted, in that survey who have participated, in that 61% of the developers are using Spring Boot as their only or primary development platform. So the number increased from 52 to 61. That is 9% of the growth rate have been seen in using the Spring Boot. This is still 2021 only. Now we are in the 2022. Definitely it will be around 70%. Right? So the survey has not been conducted, but if the survey could have been conducted, then it will becoming like 70% minimum. That means most of the organizations, most of the developers are using the Spring Boot as their development platform, primary development platform, or one and only one development platform they are using as Spring Boot. So definitely most of the members when use the Spring Boot, while they are recruiting the candidates, their primary expectation will also be a Spring Boot from the candidate, isn't it? If a Java candidate is recruiting, their projects are on Spring Boot only, then definitely they will look for the candidates to hire on the Spring Boot itself only, isn't it? So that is the reason you must have to learn the Spring Boot, because most of the organizations are now using Spring Boot as their primary development platform. So in order to cope up with their development platform, or in order to grab the market opportunities, what now widely using, you definitely have to learn the Spring Boot nowadays. Okay, so this is the conclusion from the demo part 1 and demo part 2. Of course, continuation to the demo, meaning continuation to this divided into 4 sections, right? The report is divided into 4 sections. So thriving community is the first section, meaning they have conducted this survey on your developers community, and in the developers community around 61% by the 2021 are saying were said they are using Spring as their one and only one or the primary platform, development platform. So as a continuation to their survey, so if you can see, Spring is fantastic for a developer productivity. So when asked, 67% of the managers, 66% of the architects, and 50% of the developers strongly agreed that they care deeply about developer productivity. And Spring delivers 95% of the respondents agreed that Spring Boot has a huge positive impact on productivity. Remember this, Spring Boot has a huge positive impact on the productivity. And 91% agreed that compared to other Java development platform, Spring has a bigger impact. So what do you understand from this one? Spring Boot, when we use the Spring Boot, so Spring Boot has been given a direct impact on the productivity, right? And 66% of the architects and 50% of the developers strongly agreed that they care deeply about the developer productivity, right? Obviously the developer productivity only, no matter whether you are working for 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours, in that 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours, finally what you have done for the day is called as productivity, right? You spend 24 hours, but 0 is the outcome of your spending. Then what is the benefit to the project, or what is the benefit to the company? Nothing, 0, right? So the productivity meaning how much time you spend and how much outcome is getting out of it is called as the productivity. If you spend, no matter how much time you will spend, but if you complete whatever you have to complete for that day, that is said to be good productivity. No matter, you can spend 1 hour, you can spend 8 hours, you can spend 6 hours, you can spend 18 hours, doesn't matter. But for that day, whatever you have to deliver, if you delivered, then your productivity is good, right? So Spring Boot, if we use, with the less time we spend, the more productivity we will get. That's what the survey is conducting, is saying about. 66% of the architects and more than 50% of the developers were agreed that, Spring Boot, using Spring Boot, they were having a greater productivity, meaning no matter how much time they are spending, but whatever the deliveries they have to do, they are doing that. For example, there is a login functionality. Just in case, I would like to just to show you something. So there is a login functionality, or there is a registration functionality. So this is the registration functionality. This registration functionality along with the, this is the registration functionality. So when the user is registering, there is some business cases needs to be addressed, like sending a email notification, locking the user, and when the user will click on the email notification link, the user should have to be unlocked and the user should have to be activated. Assume this entire is the use case. So this use case, the target is to complete in 1 day. If you completed this in 1 day, then your productivity is very, very good as expectation. If you cannot complete it in 1 day, maybe span to 3 days, not good, right? Maybe reasons, whatever the reasons were there, but the assigned work should have to be completed within a specified period of time. That is what the productivity symbol is. Here, when we use the Spring Boot, most of the developers are achieving their productivity. Why? Because, using Spring Boot, they only need to concentrate on the development work rather the configurations work. Sir, what is this? Again, we will discuss when we start the Spring Boot. Okay, But now I would like to explain you, if you use the Spring Boot, developer will focus on only the business logic implementation rather the configuration setup. That means the developer can write the business logic like taking username, email, password, mobile number, and then validating them, and then storing them into the TB, and then sending an email notification. So these are all the business logic, right? The developer can write that business logic. What is the configuration? For example, in order to take the username, password, and all, we need to set up some web components, right? Maybe Servlet settings, or maybe some web.xml settings, right? Maybe we need to do some configurations if it is not a Spring Boot application. Consider, right? Or maybe we have to take the dependencies jar files, or maybe we need to write the email sending logic, right? For that email, a template needs to be prepared, which is an email template, meaning HTML format of the template, and then the jar file needs to be used. Lot of configuration we need to do. But with the Spring Boot, we don't need to do all those things. Everything will be predefined or pre-existed or already available. That's what the Spring Boot is said to be a production grade framework, or Spring Boot is said to be a production grade framework actually. However, maybe my words may not be understood to you at this moment. You just consider, do we need to learn Spring Boot or not? What is the benefit that we will get if you learn Spring Boot? That is the only focus, at least today, you have to do. Right. So 91% of the respondents say Spring has been bigger impact on developer productivity than other Java platforms. See, 91% of the respondents in this survey said Spring has a bigger impact, and 95% of the respondents said Spring Boot has a bigger impact on the productivity. Right? That means what? Of course, Spring Boot is on top of the Spring only. So in order to learn the Spring Boot, you must have to complete, or you must have to know the Spring first. But in our course, like how we have designed is, in order to learn the Spring Boot here, you must have to know about the Spring core. That is good enough. You no need to learn entire Spring framework, meaning you don't need to know entire Spring framework at this moment when you are attending my session on Spring Boot. It is good enough if you know the Spring core, but Spring core is the prerequisite. For sure, Spring core is the prerequisite. So let me update my daily notes here. So prerequisite is Spring core. You must have to have the knowledge on the Spring core. Okay, that is the only thing is required, not others actually. Right, of course, Spring core, you might have completed the Jdbc, Servlets, JSP, and then your Java, right? So hopefully most of you guys or the working employees, or maybe the freshers, right? But you are coming to the Spring Boot, meaning you might have already completed at least the CoreJava, and then Servlets, JSP, Jdbc, right? Maybe you might or might not started the Spring framework. That's okay. But Spring core, if you know, then you can attend this session very well. Fine. So now let's go to the next. Does your team have a Spring specialist? So every team, when we take a Java team, or any applications team, of course, the candidates who participated in the survey, when they asked the question, do your team have a Java specialist? So 28% said, I am the Java specialist. Sorry, I'm the Spring specialist. And 6% of the people said, we have formally designated team member. And 20% members said, we have a team member who does that informally. And 34% said, no, we don't have any kind of Spring specialist. Meaning there is no title called Spring specialist, but in some other way, the developer might have already know the Spring framework, right? So that is the case. And then if we can go here, Spring projects are evergreen. This is the second point in our survey. The first point, they have done the survey on the developer community. One moment. Sorry. The first point, they have conducted the survey on the developer community. And then second point, they have conducted the survey on Spring projects evergreen. So if you can see, stakeholders trust the Spring projects. Stakeholders meaning might be the clients, customers, right? The clients trust the Spring projects basically. Why? Because 49% of the new modules are consistently added to keep up to date. This is the reason why a framework becomes popular. If there will be frequent updates, for example, you can see Angular framework updates will be like, per a month they will update. At least for 2 months, 3 months, they will release one new version. Similarly, our Spring Boot also started releasing the new versions, at least one version within the 3 to 6 months. So Spring Boot implementation, Spring Boot authors are releasing the new implementations in this period of 3 months to 6 months. That is the motto, that is the milestone they have set up. So when the keep on updates are happening to a particular framework, that means what, you are getting a market, whatever the market trend is there, right? Market trend implementations, market trend support you are getting in that framework. That is the meaning of it. So frequently updating frameworks will get always the popularity. For example, if you can see the Angular and Spring Boot, right? They keep on updating. And then 47%, the breadth of the modules provides confidence. Spring has what we need, right? So again, the depth of the confidence, the depth of the Spring modules how we have, that will give us the confidence, right? So professional experience on Spring and then Spring modules will give the confidence to the stakeholders on the Spring projects basically. And 39% have said will be using more Spring modules in coming years. Obviously, they are looking to use more Spring modules in coming up years. For example, IoT devices, right? So IoT is one area where the development is still happening in the Spring Boot. Support development is happening in the Spring Boot, right? So, but most of the areas, most of the market domains, market trends, the Spring Boot have the support nowadays. Okay, however, now the technology wise, very important is this. Very important is this. So Spring Data, top 3 projects in the 2021 year, the same. Spring Data, Spring Security, and Spring Web MVC are all used by roughly 3 in 4 survey respondents, meaning 75% of the members who participated in the survey, they told they are using the Spring Data, Spring Security, and Spring Web MVC. So this is the common Spring projects they are using. Whether it is the Spring Boot, whether it is the Spring Framework, but they are using these 3 Spring projects for sure. What maybe I'm little confusing here. Whether you are using Spring Boot, whether you are using a Spring Framework, meaning in the project, whether you are using Spring Boot or Spring Framework, but the projects that we are using, Spring Data, Spring Security, and Spring MVC, these are the Spring projects I'm talking about. So there were a number of Spring projects available. In that number of Spring projects, Spring Data, Spring Security, Spring Web MVC are commonly using projects. Why? Because, if you can see our architecture, general architecture, any of the application architecture, if we can see, so we will follow the entire architecture, right? With the MVC2, we will follow the entire architecture with the MVC2 architectural model. Right, in the MVC2 architectural model, there will be always a control, minimum 3 layers or minimum 3 tiers. If an application is said to be entire application, if it contains a minimum of 3 layers or 3 tiers arranged one above the other, then we can say it as an entire architecture. Yes, we are using entire architecture. In this entire architecture, what is the flow? How the flow will be? So the flow, we are using the MVC2. MVC2 model flow we are using here in this entire architecture. So MVC2 is also said to be an architectural pattern. Right. So according to the MVC2, there will be a controller. There will be our data persistency logic. There should be a clear separation between the data persistency logic and then data controlling logic. And later in time, MVC2 is also suggesting the view also needs to be separated, and then the controlling part needs to be separated. So already here the data part is separated, right? Data handling, data saving part is separated. So here the controlling logic plus UI logic is here. So UI logic is also should be separated from the controlling logic, meaning the components of the flow, the concerns participated in the flow needs to be clearly separated in order to avoid the problem of tight coupling. That is what the MVC2 is talking about, right? So here we are using what? In controller layer, we are using the Spring Web MVC. In DAO layer, we are using the Spring Data JPA. And in service layer, we are using the probably Spring transactions, right? And then other components of the Spring we are using. And then the Spring Web MVC, using this, we have implemented this project. But in order to have the security also, right, we will use the Spring security here. So Spring security, Spring Data JPA, and Spring Web MVC, definitely mandatory frameworks to take up, mandatory projects to use, mandatory Spring modules to use. No matter whether your implementation is Spring Boot or Spring Framework, but inside that Spring Framework, inside that Spring Boot, the modules of the Spring Framework we must have to know is the Spring Web MVC, Spring Data JPA, and then Spring Security. These three are common for any project. That's what they are talking. So if you can see, Spring Data, 79% of the members are using. See, when I'm saying Spring Data, Spring Web MVC, Spring Security are mostly using, when I'm saying, you have to consider that is the area you have to learn a lot. You have to stretch a lot. That is the area you have to learn a lot. Okay, Spring Data JPA is 79% of the members are using. Spring Security, 79% of the members who participated in this survey were using in their projects. And Spring Web MVC, 73% of the members are using. And Spring Batch, 38%, Spring Kafka, 39%, and Spring Cloud, 37%, and Spring Integration, 32% they are using. So here if you can see, Spring Data, again in the Spring Data, what exactly they are using, because 79% of the using the Spring Data, right? Spring Data have again various sub projects inside in it. So which project are mostly using? Spring Data JPA is mostly using. That's where we also learn in our Spring Boot, Spring Data JPA. See this? Implementing the data access layer using the Spring Data JPA, where Hibernate is the underlying provider for the Spring Data JPA. In depth of Spring Data JPA, we will see here, isn't it? Every point in the Spring Data JPA you must have to know, right? Okay. However, now, of course, Jdbc is using, and then Spring REST is also using 51%. And Redis, Elastic Cache, Elasticsearch, MongoDB, these are also using. However, if we can go here, why the Spring framework? Why the Spring framework we should have to pick? There were a lot of framework, right? Meaning Struts is one framework. Struts was one framework. JSF was one framework. And Spring is another framework at the Java side. If we consider these all the frameworks, why only we should have to pick the Spring project? Number one, more number of updates are happening over the period of time. That is number one reason. And documentation, 80% of the documentation, 80% of the members were said Spring documentation is available. Most of the Spring documentation is available. When you say something, for example, you want to know or you want to implement the what you want to implement, the assume Spring data JPA, just type it and see this spring.io, see this reference documentation. So for anything, they have given the reference documentation. Let me reshare my screen just in a moment of time. Right. So if you can see the Spring Data JPA, a very good documentation is given. See this project metadata, new and noteworthy, what is new in Spring Data JPA 2.5, right? And what is new in Spring Data JPA 1.11, what's new in Spring Data JPA 1.0, dependencies, what dependencies we have to use, right? And then what are the snapshots, what are the M1 milestones, what are the releases. They have given dependency management with Spring Boot, working with the data repositories, core concepts. See how we have to use what clear. Point number 1, save the entity. Point number 2, find by ID. See this how they have given very, very clear documentation they have given. So other frameworks, I don't see this much of clear documentation, right? So see this with a clear examples he mentioned, like how to use the data JPA. And he even given an explanation for each and every annotation. For example, at the query here, there is a separate documentation for that at the query annotation, what it is. So this, what does it mean, what it will do. So the documentation is pretty clear when we use the Spring framework. So when the documentation is there, first of all, it's an open source, right? Open source along with the documentation, meaning whenever you find something to be implemented which is newer to you, you can easily go to its documentation and follow its documentation. So general availability documentations, they will release, keep on. So for example, Spring Data JPA, if you can see this, learner support is already there. See this current general availability project, reference documentation, API documentation. So we can refer the reference documentation and then API documentation, both we can refer. And support. So 2.6.x initial release, end of the support. He is even mentioning when the end of the support for this version in data JPA, and end commercial support 2024 312. Commercial support meaning, you know, if we want any commercial support, still we can take from the Spring community, right? But no one of the members, no one prefer to take the commercial support, because already a lot of developer support, developer community is there on Spring framework. If you got any issue, you struck with any issue, you reach out to the developer community will provide you the solutions. Hardly or very rarely, very rarely, we will get a situation to go for the Spring commercial support. But I have not seen, usually we'll go for the Spring commercial supports. However, these are the samples they have given. See this Spring Data Book example, Spring Data JP example. A clear documentation with the number of examples. Try to understand the concept. Meaning, in order to make us to understand the concept very clearly, a very good documentation given with an examples, right? Use cases, a very clear documentation given by the Spring framework. That is one of the reason most of the members are using to choose the Spring framework. Okay, so maturity. So level of maturity meaning the sub market is, for example, now we want to implement the some OTP mechanism, right? Or some push notifications to the mobile. If you would like to implement it, the support for implementing it nowadays Spring also have inside the Spring framework. That is the level of maturity the Spring framework have, right? For example, in order to perform the single sign-on, we need to use the IDPs. The IDP support is there in the Spring framework. That is the level of maturity the Spring have, right? So that is the reason Spring is the most pickable project, or mostly the the candidates are trying to use the project. Okay, so community support. For example, Stack Overflow, 60% of the developers in the Stack Overflow, for example, you can take 60% of the developer support will be there in the Stack Overflow, meaning all the members in the Stack Overflow, for example, 100 members were there in the Stack Overflow. Out of 100, you will find 60 members on the Spring framework, Spring developers only. So this is a very, 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 very good community portal where your day-to-day issues will be resolved by this community. You can join freely, no need to pay anything, right? And we can also the Stack Overflow also community paid support. So you can build a team and then you can get a paid support from the stackoverflow.com as well, but mostly not required. Whatever the questions, for example, if I type the Spring Boot, okay, just see, okay, I'm not a robot, just I'm clicking on it. It is asking me to verify the traffic lights. Just let me verify the traffic lights. Done. Now see this. How to configure port for a Spring Boot application, how to access value defined in the application that properties file in Spring Boot, and running code after Spring Boot starts, difference between Spring MVC and Spring Boot, how can I add filter classes in Spring Boot. Lot of questions. See this, 266 votes, 24 answers, 17 answers, 11 answers. Just I type Spring Boot, various questions, various realistical problems were answered using the developer community, right? For example, I will type Spring Boot Kafka, just in case. See this error while starting Spring Boot Kafka project. Spring Boot Kafka metrics configuration. Spring Boot Kafka consumer bean scope. What is the better combination? Spring Boot with Kafka. Spring Boot Kafka consumer process, right? So these are all when you are how to override property in Spring Boot Kafka. So whenever you say Spring Boot and whenever you are working with the Spring Boot and then Kafka, you have the developer support community. For example, I will use Spring Boot Keycloak. Keycloak is an IDP. See this. Spring Boot Keycloak directed to 403 forbidden. So if one person got the issue, then 6 persons got given the answer for that issue. Keycloak Spring Boot configuration. Keycloak is an IDP which will maintain the which will maintain the security, meaning the user authentication authorization will be maintaining by this Keycloak. By the way, in our project also, we will use the WSO2 identity server or Keycloak here we will use as a IDP. So I have given a WSO2 in our course implementation, but I would like to go with the Keycloak actually. So we will use Keycloak most commonly. Keycloak is very lightweight actually. So let's use the Keycloak as the IDP in our Spring Boot configurations. So if that is the case, then whatever the issues you will face during your work, then you got a very good support here, right? So that is one of the reason most of the peoples will look for the Spring projects to opt for their projects. And popularity, 51%. One moment, just a moment. Sorry, I'm back. So I have seen some little disturbance. However, why these drawings are drawing by someone else? If you have any question, you can raise your hands, man. Why you are drawing this such lines and all? I don't understand. You type, na? Whenever you got some issue or some doubt, you can type in the chat rather than drawing along with me. Okay, right. So 33% approved by the enterprise architecture team, and 28% of the case studies were conducted on the Spring modules. But mostly you can consider these 3 reasons: documentation, maturity, and then community support. So these are the reasons why the Spring framework becomes popular. And again, the Spring Boot also became popular because of the developer productivity, right? Developer productivity will be increased like anything if we use the Spring Boot, because configurations we no need to use, whereas we only can concentrate on the our development. I will explain practically. I will showcase how fast we can develop a. Let us take practically. We'll implement one use case. What is that? Let us take a Spring Web MVC application using the Spring framework, and how much time it has been taking for us to implement. Let us see. And the same we will implement using the Spring Boot, and let us see how much time it is taking, and what is the configurations, or what is the what are the things or making us to implement the application very faster using the Spring Boot. We will analyze. That is the probably tomorrow we will discuss why the Spring Boot is using. Basically, when the Spring Boot is using, the developer productivity is directly impacting, meaning the developer productivity is increasing like anything, right? And 70% of the organizations are probably the members are using nowadays the Spring Boot. Okay, however, if we can go back here, so APIs and then the modern apps blossoming. So explore APIs to internal. So types of applications organizations to use Spring Boot for. Carefully observe. Please carefully observe. Please carefully observe. This is very important for you to analyze something. This is very important for you to analyze something. What you have to exactly learn in the Spring Boot. Okay. So what you have to exactly learn in the Spring Boot is what you will get from this point. 97% of the respondents say APIs are critical to their Spring development efforts. So 97% of the members say API development is very critical, meaning lot of configurations they have to do, lot of efforts they have to put to implement the APIs using the Spring. Whereas such efforts will be minimized, the implementation of the APIs becomes very easy using the Spring Boot. So types of applications organizations use Spring Boot for. So Spring Boot uses for which kind of application development in the organization? 84% are using it for exposing the APIs to internal consumers. Meaning 84% of the members are using Spring Boot for the API development. That may be internal consumers or external consumers, no matter. 68% of the people are writing the APIs for external consumers. External consumers in the sense what, you will write your REST API, right? And that will be consumed by some other members of some other applications. That is the external consumers. For example, you can take UPI. How about your UPI? UPI is the same. Any bank is nowadays supporting the UPI, right? When you open your UPI app and then you choose your bank and then check your balance, then your balance is displaying. You are no need to go and then log into your bank accounts and then see your balance. Your balance is displaying in a single unified application. The platform is combining all your bank accounts, and then you can see the bank balance without showing or without logging to the banks. What does it mean? The banks were exposed the APIs, where those APIs are the generic and then consumed by the UPIs. So that is called what, kind of an external consumers. And internal consumers meaning what? Whatever the API you used, your application is using. For example, here in our architecture, if you can see, here you will develop the API. This API will be again used by our Angular application or React application. This is our API. This is our application. This is our backend API. Whole and soul, we are building an application. So this is the internal API consuming, right? However it is, whatever the internal or whatever the API, but Spring Boot is used for consuming the APIs, meaning writing the APIs, API development. So once you go back to your course content, what we are doing in this one, right? See this, implementing the controller layer, building the Spring REST controller components using Spring Boot, API versioning and then content negotiation, and building the Spring WebMVC controller components using Spring Boot, validations and data bindings. Whatever the REST API, whatever the WebMVC component it is, how we can apply the internationalization, that we will see here. Right. Right. So this is where, okay. So this is where we will use our API development, right? Meaning in our throughout the course also, we will use the Spring Boot for the API development and as well as the application development. So how we will do here in this course with the Spring Boot is first you will start implementing a web application using the time leaf. Here is the time leaf we will use, and here is the Spring Boot we will use, and we will develop the application which is exactly similar to this one. For example, let me just maximize it. Yes, so you can see it. So this is the UI, right? This UI has been implemented using the time leaf, and then we will use the Spring WebMVC first. And of course, the repository using the data JPA, services implementation using the transactions, and then entities using the JPA, and Spring WebMVC we will use here to implement the controller layer. So these are all the modules we'll implement, and in a single var file, we will implement all these modules. So first we will implement the Spring WebMVC application using the our Spring Boot. And the next what we will do is we will convert our monolithic application into the microservices. So at that moment, what we will do is we will take off the Spring MVC. In place of the Spring MVC, we will write the REST services, REST APIs. So when we write the REST APIs, then our UI also will change, right? That UI we will use like this. So points, this is some other example I have taken, but you can see each and every API is consuming by one module of the UI. So typically it will be like this. So in our step one, we implemented like this. So in step one, we implement the web application using the time leaf. And in step two, what we will do is we will migrate our Spring WebMVC to the API development. Then where we will implement the Spring REST, and API development we will use here using the REST standards, REST style and all. And then the UI we will use as the React.js application. The UI we will use as the React.js application. Don't worry, expectation is only the Spring Core. If you know the Spring Core, that is very good enough. You might not know time leaf, you might not know Spring REST, you might not know Spring Data JPA. That is where you came here to learn, right? With the realistical implementation, realistical use cases. My expectation is you have to know only the Spring Core, nothing is required. Only Spring Core is required to you. Okay, right. So Spring Core is good. Spring Core is good. Now, what we will do here, Spring REST, and then meaning API development we will do. First, we will do the application development. So the application will be, this is the application that we go, right? So this is the dashboard, and then dashboard will have the finance and then sales reports, and then categories module will have the categories will display, and then parent categories. I will explain about the business and then use cases and then architectural diagram and then the data flow diagrams when we start this project using the Spring Boot concepts learning. Okay, what I mean to say is you will learn the Spring Boot concepts on a project. It is not like, example, hello world program, or it is not like hi bye bye program. No, it is the conjunction of the use cases, continuity of the use cases implementation, one after the other, using the or by adding the various Spring Boot concepts, so that you will easily understand. So where and then how and then where and then how you can use the Spring Boot concepts, right? That is the expectation that we will implement. Don't worry, here in our content, Spring Boot content, if we can see, what we have given is in data JPA implementation, we will discuss about the Hibernate, and then I'll discuss about the Spring Data JPA. See the Spring Data JPA and then Hibernate. So what is Hibernate? Usually how the Hibernate will be, because if you know the Hibernate, then only you will understand the Spring Data JPA very easily. So we'll spend Hibernate 1 week, and then again we'll spend on the Spring Data JPA. Okay, my expectation is when whoever are joining to this course, they only need to know the Spring Core. That is the expectation, and the rest of the things I'll take care. While implementing, if you are not understanding anything, you can ask me your question any number of times. But my expectation is only Spring Core is required to you guys, whereas the rest of the things I will make you up to implement these kind of applications. How I will make you up to implement and all, it is again the plan, and then according to this time that we spend usually. Okay, right. So now so first we'll implement this Spring Boot application, meaning Spring Boot with the WebMVC application. So then we will use first like this. So let us use Spring Boot to develop the WebMVC application using Timeleaf as UI plus Spring WebMVC as the controller part. And then we will use Spring WebMVC and then Spring Security and then Spring Data JPA. Spring Data JPA. Right, that means Timeleaf is the UI we will use, and then here Spring WebMVC we will use, and then Spring Security, and then Spring Data JPA we will use, and then the Spring Transactions we will use, and then logging mechanism, and then the exception handling, and then validations, and then internationalization support. Right, so these are all what we will use and then implement a WebMVC application. Later in time, what we will do is, we already have used all these things now. So then what we will do is, here let us just replace it with the Spring REST API, and in place of Timeleaf, let us take the React.js. That's it. Now in place of the Timeleaf, we'll take the React.js, and then we'll just, these rest are all the things we have already learned, right? So we will again use the Spring REST API here, and then React.js as a front end we will use, right? And then here we will use the API development. So API development using the Spring Boot. So Spring Boot, we will use two things. Using Spring Boot, we'll implement the web application, and using Spring Boot, we'll implement the REST API development. Okay, so these are the two implementations that we will do in our entire course implementation. Entire in the sense, Spring Boot course implementation. So this is what our yes.
So Angular is not again, sir?
No, not Angular. I will use the React actually. Angular is a heavy load framework compared to the React. React is lightweight. For microservices architecture, React is the most prominent and then mostly used client-side framework, not Angular. Angular have a lot of burden on the UI side because of its heavy load framework. Okay, so React is very lightweight, and React would be the preferable for the very lightweight applications, kind of a microservices implementations. Okay, so I will go with the React in this course, not Angular.
It's very useful to the microservices or React.js.
Correct. React. Actually, Angular we can use, and then React we can use. Both we can use, but compared to the performance, compared to the lightweightness at the UI browser side, React will have a very lightweightness and also easy mobile support. If you implement a React application, we can convert into mobile native application very easily using the React native module. So there are the benefits. That's the reason I'll go with the React JS framework. Okay, fine.
Okay,
Now,
thank you.
Okay, fine. So then what we will do, we will again implement the microservices architecture, and finally the microservice architecture maintenance or the management will be with this one. So like this it will be. So just let me close this. Right. So you can see this, our production architecture looks something like this. So we will use the React.js here, and there will be a load balancer, application load balancer. AWS will use here, and then AWS, the production deployment will be in AWS. Our production deployment will be in the AWS. So here, that's the reason you have chosen you can see VPCs everywhere. So if you can see here, there is a API gateway. Again, this API gateway we will implement using our Spring Cloud, and then here we will apply the Resilience 4J, and then we will Dockerize it. And then we will implement the user management service, which is also Dockerized, which is a Spring Boot application. This user management application will provide us the JWT tokens by speaking to an IDP called the Keycloak or WSO2. And this is in another VPC, this is another VPC. The VPC to VPC communication will be happened using the NAT gateway. So here we will apply the NAT gateway and then makes a communication from the gateway to this user management service. This user management service not directly accessed by the other applications. Why? Because this is in a separate VPC in a private subnet. What is private subnet? What is VPC? What is NAT gateway? What is load balancer? These are all the things I will explain when we were started our production deployment. Once after all these are completed, when we are trying to deploy in our application in production, at that moment, I'll explain all these things. But what we will cover in this overall session, overall course, Spring Boot, microservices, Spring Cloud, Docker. So these are the concepts we will cover. And what are the other tools we will use here? Resilience 4J. And of course, here we are using the ELK, and we are using the Grafana and then Prometheus, and we will use the Jipkin. And also we'll use Kafka in one use case, RabbitMQ in one use case, so that you will get an understanding between the RabbitMQ and then Kafka, when to go for Kafka, when to go for RabbitMQ, that you will get here. Okay. Jenkins and Kubernetes is not part of this session. Okay, so Jenkins and Kubernetes I don't touch. This is the purely Spring Boot microservices session. So there is no pipeline creation. There is no Kubernetes. Only up to Docker I will conduct. Okay, fine. So now coming to the course content, most of the members are asking what you will cover, whether you will cover Docker or not. All these things you are asking. So this course content I will publish in our DURGASOFT website. You go and then see the course content, where you can see here the microservices, what concepts we will see in microservices. Security, Spring Security we will use. Spring Security we will use here actually. You can see Spring Security we will use here, meaning Spring Boot security in the sense underlying framework is Spring Security only. So Spring Security we will use and then secure our this application, time-life application. Later in time, what we will do is we'll go for the token-based mechanism. This is a session-based mechanism. This is a session security, but later in time we'll go for a token-based security, meaning this is not the client-server architecture, but this is purely the client-server architecture. So where the UI will become at the client side, meaning the browser side. I will explain all these things. Please don't worry. But the point here is, what I would like to tell you is the token-based authentication and then access controlling mechanism we will implement here in our application using the OAuth2 plus OpenID. Both we will use OAuth2 plus OpenID. Again, sir, what is OAuth2? What is OpenID? All these things we'll discuss when we start the implementations. So for a glance, where we will use the OAuth OpenID, what is the need of OpenID for us? If you can see this, there is a Facebook login, there's a Twitter registration, or there is a Facebook login and then Twitter login. So we'll have here the Facebook login and then Twitter login. So Facebook login, Twitter login, how it will be possible? Using the OpenID only. So that OpenID we will implement. OAuth 2 plus OpenID, both we will implement in our throughout the course. Right. So right. So and whatever we'll cover, then Spring Cloud content and Spring Cloud content and the config server service discovery, whatever I have mentioned in my production architecture, these are all we will cover. ELC, config server and service registry, API gateway, resilience patterns, right? And then monitoring, right? And then the event sourcing mechanism, event triggering mechanism using CQRS, and then distributed transactions handling using the Saga pattern. All those things we will cover here. So that's what you can see in my course content even. So microservices tracing and microservices communication, API gateway, resiliency, service discovery, and then Spring Cloud overview explanation, config server. And here I have not added the anything about the event driven microservices, but that also I will cover here, like CQRS and then the Saga, very important event driven microservices. And there is one banner I would like to showcase you, meaning the poster I would like to showcase you. That poster gives you a glance about the frameworks or the tools that we are using in this entire Spring Boot cloud with microservices. See this Spring REST and WebMVC, Spring Data JPA, transaction management, Spring Batch, CQRS and Saga, Spring Cloud Gateway, service registry and load balancing. So these are all the things you can see in my production architecture, right? Circuit breaker and then rate limiter. Circuit breaker, rate limiter, and then you can see here resiliency, right? So these are all you can implement in the gateway level. So circuit breaker, resiliency, circuit breaker is part of the resiliency basically. Circuit breaker and rate limiter is part of this resiliency. So that is the reason. So if you can see resilience 4J, we will implement at the gateway level. And then ELK, logging ELK. So ELK you can see here. And then the integration with MongoDB, Apache Kafka, and then Redis cache. So Kafka is here and Redis cache is here. And somewhere here we will use the MongoDB, right? So this is the MongoDB, right? And then the security, OAuth 2 plus OpenID we will use. So here the security, JWT we will use. Of course, underlying OAuth 2 framework we will use, and then IDP key cloak we will use. So OAuth 2 and then OpenID, JWT, and then Docker we will use. So everywhere you can see each and every application is Dockerized here. See this, everywhere you can see in my production architecture, everything is Dockerized here. And then finally, it will be deployed in the AWS cloud using the Elastic Beanstalk. So Elastic Beanstalk we will use and then deploy this entire things. Okay, so whatever I covered, whatever I given in this banner, everything will be covered here. And here you can see OAuth 2 and OpenID, right? I already have given you the use case where we will use the OpenID. Facebook login, Twitter login will also implement here. That is the social logins. As we are using the IDP here, so we definitely can go with the Facebook login, Twitter login. So here we are using the IDP. Key cloak we will use, not WSO2. But again, either WSO2 or key cloak, I'll come at that point. So WSO2 is little heavyweight. To start it take around 5 to 10 minutes. But key cloak is very, very lightweight. To start it, it will just take 2 minutes to 5 minutes. That is the reason I'm pretty much interested to go with the key cloak. But key cloak have a limited features than the WSO2. Again, I'll come to that point. What is WSO2? What is key cloak and all? But this is the market expectation. Whether you join or not, it is up to you. Wherever you learn and whatever you learn, this is the market expectation. Solidly, you have to learn. Okay, so don't skip any of these concepts. Learning so that maybe you will get the job. See, nowadays, if you know simple REST API, you are getting job. nowadays, at least. Getting job nowadays is not so hard, very, very easy. Companies are very, very selfish, according to my view. Why they're selfish? They will fire the candidates when they don't require the resources. They will hire the same candidates or maybe the candidates whenever they got the requirement. So when they are hiring, they never see about what the candidate know and all. If the candidate knows Spring idea, basic idea about the Spring and then just a Spring Boot, yes, they are nowadays taking. You can't believe resources are not, HRs are facing trouble to finding out the resources nowadays. What I mean to say is getting job is very easy, but the point, making it to be sustainable without any hurdles and all is very important. Okay, so that's where you have to learn all these things. So these are all the things will be covered as part of the entire Spring Boot microservices Spring Cloud session that I'm conducting. Okay, right. Course duration is for the 90 days and you consider from today onwards 90 days. So course duration, consider 90 days. 90 days from today onwards, 11 April 2022. From today onwards, you consider 90 days. So this is also comes under your class 1. So tomorrow class 2, class 3. Likewise, let us conduct actually. Okay, but course duration is 90 days. So tomorrow, let us start our Spring Boot discussion. What is Spring Boot? Why Spring Boot came into the picture? Before Spring Boot, what is the state of the Spring applications? And after Spring Boot, what are the benefits we will get? And how Spring Boot is directly impacting the developer's productivity? These are all the things we will discuss tomorrow, again at the same year. Right? Fee is for you, for this fee is the 7,000 because I'm not covering the Spring Core, right? Expectation is Spring Core. If I could have already covered the Spring Core as well, then the fee will be 8,000. But now fee will be the 7,000 because Spring Core I won't cover in these sessions. Spring Core is already the prerequisite. Meaning expectation is you guys should have to know the Spring Core. So Spring Core is the expectation and then the fee is the 7,000 because I am not teaching Spring Core again here. So tomorrow onwards, let us start our Spring Boot content and then concepts. Any questions for me? If you would like to ask any questions to me.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, do we get the recorded sessions?
Yes. Recordings will be provided to you, and recordings validity will be the 6 months. No download option will be given. Only the viewable option will be given. Recordings will be provided for the 6 months. No downloadable. No download. Only viewable.
Okay, sir. From where we will get these recording sessions, sir? Like in a Google Drive or some
Google Drive. They will give you the Google Drive. Actually, there are some difficulties we were faced with the Google Drive. So what I did, I will create one Spring classroom, meaning one Google Classroom.
Okay.
That Google Classroom, I will upload the day-to-day recordings, and then I will give the access to the peoples. Okay. Then you guys can go and then see the recordings, and after 6 months, I will take off those recordings.
Yeah. Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So uploading the Google Drive is taking a lot of time. That is the reason we came up with this alternate solution. Okay. Right. Yeah.
Sir,
Do you remember?
is the configure software open source or
Sorry. What is that?
the tools you are using all are open source?
Exactly. Correct. All are open source, including IDP. All are open source, including this IDP. All are open source tools. All are, even Kafka, RabbitMQ, and then the Prometheus, Chipkin, ELK, Cache, API Gateway. All are open source. Only in this entire architecture, one component will charge us. That component is the NAT gateway. NAT gateway only will charge us, but that is a deployment strategy. Deployment model or deployment platform little charges because we need to purchase a domain. So the domain cost is around 1,000 rupees. and the NAT gateway will cost us, like $0.45 per day. So deployment platform is chargeable, but the development tools and then development frameworks, technologies, tools are all open source. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Any more questions for me, folks? Fine. If you don't
Sir,
have any questions, yeah.
we will build this entire ecosystem, right, in our course.
Exactly. Entire ecosystem we will build. That's true. Entire ecosystem will build in 90 days. Entire ecosystem will be built. Okay. So yeah. So could you please teach about the Spring Core and make 3 to 8K? Yeah, actually Spring Core, this is the add-on batch on top of the batch already we started on the last 2 weeks back. So in last 2 weeks, I already have completed the Spring Core. So again, Spring Core discussion I don't want to make here. That is the reason. Without Spring Core, this batch is starting, assuming that you already know the Spring Core. So there is one more batch is starting by me on the 18th. So 18th, where I will again come from the beginning, meaning here Spring Boot and microservices again starting at 18th at 8:30 a.m. So in this course, again, I will come from the Spring Core discussion, Spring Core and then Spring Boot discussions. So Spring Core will be covered here. But in today's session, Spring Core is not covered. So expectation is the Spring Core is a prerequisite. Right. Okay.
Sir, including Spring Core also 3 months, right?
Yeah, but the core is 2 weeks. We'll discuss, right? You ignore that 2 weeks course. 2 weeks duration, please add here.
Okay.
Please don't add here. 2 weeks duration.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one more thing, sir. What about, are you providing the class notes every day, and is it what?
Two types of class notes we will maintain here. One is already I will give you the handouts related to the Spring Boot microservices and all. For example, you can see the material like Spring Boot material, Spring microservices, Spring Cloud, something like that. I will give the handouts. I think not here.
Okay.
For example, microservices material. So these are all the handouts I will give with the step-by-step approach. And also in day-to-day, we will type something, right? I will type something. Whenever required, I will type something, right? So that
Running
class
notes.
notes also I will upload. Running notes, yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I don't recommend to learn the Spring Boot without the knowledge of Spring Core. I don't recommend, because while learning the Spring Boot, we have to come across various concepts and understanding the Spring Boot, especially the various annotations. So in order to understand the annotations, first we need to understand what is the Spring Core container, how many ways of the containers we have, what is the difference between Java Bean and Spring Bean, how the Spring Bean will be created using the Java Bean. So these are all the background knowledge is required. Otherwise, understanding the Spring Boot is difficult. Yeah, sure. Spring Core reference material. Of course, today I am uploading the Spring Core material. So reference material. Okay, I will share. Tomorrow I will share. Okay. Yeah. Anything else for me? Yeah. Understood. Okay, folks. I think that's all from my side. See you tomorrow at the same time. That is 7 a.m. with the Spring Boot starting from tomorrow onwards. Any new batches on DevOps? For now, no, not new batches on DevOps, but planning to have one weekend workshop on some other tool or other technology like Apache Kafka with microservices I'm conducting in the coming weekend. After that, I'll conduct the Docker as one weekend workshop, paid workshop. Then Kubernetes for the 2 weekends workshop, paid workshop. So coming up in this month, Docker and Kubernetes weekend workshops will be started. Those are the paid workshops for the 3 weekends. Okay, you guys can utilize it. I don't know Spring Core, just I know CoreJava. Yeah, that is the reason actually. Without knowing the Spring Core, attending the Spring Boot is really difficult. So Spring Core, however, I will start in the 18th March starting batch, right? And but in this batch, 7 a.m. batch, I don't start the Spring Core again. Okay, Kafka weekend class is part of regular DevOps class. No, it is not. Kafka weekend session is different one. Okay, that is not part of regular DevOps class. That is the different one. Okay.
Sir, is there like possibility to download server in Google?
Your voice is breaking actually.
Is my voice audible now? Hello.
Yeah.
Sir, my doubt is like, is there any possibilities to run Apache Tomcat server in Google Drive?
Apache Tomcat server in Google Drive.
Yeah.
No, because Apache Tomcat server requires a process. That process will start when we start that bat file is there, right? Startup.bat file or startup.exe. When we start there, then the process will start. Not only Apache server, any server, in order to start, we need a process actually. The process needs to be created over the operating system. So using Google Drive, running Apache Tomcat I don't think it is possible. No, it is not possible because process initiation requires to be happened on the operating system, right? So Google Drive is some cloud application, so we cannot run it. Got it? Huh? Yeah. Okay, folks. See you tomorrow at the same time. How many days this course is? This course is for the 90 days. 90 days. Okay, 90 days. Yeah.
Hello,
Thank
sir.
you. Yes.
Sir, actually, I don't have the front-end knowledge like what you are saying, React JS or Angular.
Not required. No, my expectation is only to have the Spring Core. That's enough. Come with that. Rest all I will take care. Okay. They are very easy.
Kafka weekend class, you said it's not part of the regular DevOps evening class, right?
Yes. Correct. It is not part of
right?
that. Not part
Okay.
of that.
How do I get access to that?
Actually, we are conducting it as a paid one, but
really?
you already have the DevOps student, right? So if you are interested, I will provide the access for that. That's okay. For our candidates who are interested for the DevOps, especially for the DevOps candidates who are interested, I will provide the access for them to attend the Kafka. Okay, I'll provide an access.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, folks. Thank you so much, and then see you tomorrow with the Spring Boot starting. Thank you.